Um, so, I'm here to talk about character creation, specifically creating paranormal, more than human characters. My technique is just one of many. Don't feel bound to follow anything I say because, you know, if you go beyond it, the character you create will suck. It's not that, that's not the way it works. I'm just here to share a particular method that works with me when creating my characters, specifically when I'm creating my main characters, because they're usually the ones I spend the most time on. Okay? So you'll have to forgive me if this sounds a little cheesy, but I'm a lawyer by training, so we like our mnemonics. So my method, I can summarize it as the 5C method. Basically, these are 5 elements. Oh, gee, the laughter. But yeah, these are the 5 elements which happen to start with the letter C, which I try to make sure that the characters possess. Okay, these 5 aspects or 5 steps would be: first is context, next is conflict, third is competence or capability, fourth is coherence, and the fifth is cut. Okay, we'll go through this one by one. Don't worry, and I have examples. First is context. What do we mean by context? When you're creating a character, you don't create a character in a vacuum. You don't just create this character without any reference to anything else. Like with normal people, every character you create has to emerge from a context. He comes out, he's produced by a particular time, a particular place, a particular history. So that's what I mean by context. Some people ask the question, which comes first, character, the plot, the setting? For me, it's almost always the setting. I mean, you might have a big idea of a character. Oh, I want to make a character who's a bit funny, or I want to have a character who's a very pretty girl. But after that, you have to start, at least for me, I have to start working on the context to make the character in any way real to me. Okay, so why would you start with the setting? Because like I said, when you say you're going to create a character, especially if you're creating a paranormal character, you have no limits. You can create God, you can create the devil, you can create a normal person who stumbles upon something extraordinary. You have no limits. And while that might sound very liberating, it's very hard. It's like the blank piece of paper that you're facing before you start writing. When you have no parameters, it's hard to get started. That's why one of the purposes of creating the setting is from the start, you define what is allowed and what is not allowed in your world and your characters. I'll give you an example. This is a book called Soon I Will Be Invincible. All right? It's I won't tell you what kind of book it is. It's probably obvious from the cover, but it will be obvious from the excerpt I'm going to read. This is an example of a world creation. And tama-tama, he starts the story this way. Okay? This is how the story starts. This morning on planet Earth, there are 1,686 enhanced, gifted, or otherwise superpowered persons. Of these, 126 are civilians leading normal lives. 38 are kept in research facilities funded by the Department of Defense or foreign equivalents. 226 are aquatic, confined to the oceans. 29 are strictly localized, powerful trees, and entities like the Great Sphinx, and the Pyramid of Giza, and it goes on. Talks about alien visitors and powerful dogs and people from off-continuity. It's a superhero book. But what you see is when it defines the world, it already defines the kind of characters that you will find present here. Basically it's an anything goes thing. You can have magic, you can have science. In some worlds you only have science, in some worlds you only have magic. When you start from a context like that, it helps you create the kind of character. I mean, it helps you focus on the kind of character you're going to produce and make sure that he fits in the world. Because if you have a fantasy setting and suddenly you have Iron Man walking around, it makes no sense. Okay? So that's the first part, the world. If you're creating a paranormal character, you can take that world from practically anything. You can take the world from the world as it is now, and you just add one particular supernatural element. You'll take the world as it is now, but you'll add vampires. You take the world as it is now, but you'll add a magic sword. Okay? Or you can create something completely different. But depending on what kind of world you'll create, that'll change the amount of research you have to do. And sadly, research is very important to creating anything, even if it's just a character. Okay? So, but the world is just one aspect of context. The second aspect of context is the story. You don't have to have the complete story in your mind before you start making the characters. That's kind of a chicken and egg thing. But it helps if you have a particular idea of the gist of what your story is going to be. If you're going to create a comedy story, that's going to change the kind of characters you're going to create. If you want to create a horror story, then you probably shouldn't have, well, I was going to say you shouldn't have a clown, but actually you can have a clown in a horror story. It's probably more effective. So, but that will limit what kind of, again, limit the kind of character you're going to create. And if you know what kind of story, basically, you're going to create, you also have an idea of what roles you will have to fill with your characters. Because if you're creating a, say, the princess from a dragon story, you will obviously have to have a princess, and you obviously have to have a dragon. Now, they can be one and the same character if you'd like, but you'd still have to fill those roles. And again, that will help you narrow down your character creation process. And that's really the point of the first step. Which brings me to the second step, conflict. Now, once you have your world, your story, your setting, you're able to find the most interesting parts of that world. You're able to determine, and that will help you determine where you're going to place your characters. Because one of the, at least for the stories I like writing and reading, the driving force is always the conflict. Okay, there's always some sort of opposition. And if you have your world at hand, then you can pinpoint where this opposition is. Because if you're creating a character, especially a main character, and most especially a point of view character, this character has to be in a situation where he can easily be drawn into the conflict. Okay, I'll give an example. I hope everyone's heard of Trece, right? For those who have not heard of Trece, it's basically urban fantasy in the Philippines. Okay, it's basically what is the setting of Trece? The setting of Trece is that there's the normal world. It's more or less how you know it, and there's a supernatural world, which is all the Balang, Manananggal. And these two worlds coexist, but they usually don't overlap. But when they do overlap, it's usually bad for someone from our side of the tracks. So there you see where the conflict is. You try to locate the conflict. The conflict is where precisely those two worlds will overlap. So what do the creators of Trece do? They place their main character in the exact center of that conflict. They place her in a position where she investigates crimes, where precisely the supernatural intrudes upon the natural. And that's where they place her. That's why it's so easy to tell stories about Trece and the Kambal, because they are in a position where they're constantly exposed to the conflict. That's important if you want to make a character. Because if you have a great world, a great conflict, but your character is, someone who studies languages in a university, it might not work unless somehow these languages are, he discovers a language of alien origin, etc., etc. But again, you have to find the conflict. The conflict doesn't only come from outside the character. Sometimes it comes from inside. Like I said, you're dealing with paranormal characters. If you're dealing with a paranormal character,